country and around the world. We're thrilled to have you with you. My name is John Huckins, and I'm the co-founding director of the Global Immersion Project. And we are a peacemaking training organization who is working with Christians across the world to help us take seriously our call to follow Jesus, a Jesus who embodied a cross and set down his sword, one who moved as an instrument of peace rather than a conduit of violence. And for us, we try to create space for us to learn from multiple perspectives. When conflict happens in our world, we don't want to just pick a side and then dig our heels in and assume we know all the answers. We actually want to get curious and learn from people that are actually impacted by the conflicts in our world. And so this Global Immersion webinar space is one of those spaces where we try to learn from people on the ground within traditions that are different than ours often, so we can get curious about how we can better follow Jesus as everyday peacemakers today. So as you are signing in, looking forward to introducing our guests to you today. As you look at your Zoom screen, there's a comment section. And if you would jump in there, it's actually a chat, it's called. If you jump in and say where you're from and why you're choosing to be on this webinar, that'd be really helpful for us just to orient to who is on this call and why you're here. I also want to make note that we're in the middle of what we're calling a Peacemaking on Earth campaign through Global Immersion, and it's happening all throughout December, where there's a collective of artists that have created music and spoken word poetry and actual art pieces that give us a picture for what peace can look like. It's a space for us to understand that in the midst of the chaos and conflict, we can actually find rest through the medium of art. We encourage you to engage with that through our social media platforms in the coming weeks. So, why a webinar about Jerusalem? You signed up for this in the midst of a couple weeks of chaos and probably complexity and misunderstanding. As we know, President Trump declared Jerusalem the capital of Israel, which is something that's been proposed by previous presidents, and it's actually had congressional support, largely bipartisan, but it's never been acted upon. So why did this happen, and why is this so significant? Specifically understanding that Jerusalem is sacred for all three monotheistic faiths. Jews, Christians, Muslims all hold Jerusalem as a central piece in our story. And so when we talk about Jerusalem, and we can't not talk about faith and the way that faith impacts politics and specifically impacts one plot of soil in the Middle East. For the Jewish community, the Western Wall, the Temple Mount, is the most holy site in all of their tradition. For within the Muslim tradition, Al-Aqsa Mosque or Haram al-Sharif is the third most holy site within their tradition. For Christians like myself, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is where it's celebrated that Jesus' death and resurrection took place, is a central part of our story. And there is this political reality of a conflict between Israel and Palestine in this ongoing journey towards a sustained and just peace. So today we're gonna dig into all of this and try to make sense of what our role can be as followers of Jesus who are committed to the work of everyday peacemaking. And if you're listening in and you're not from the Christian tradition, this is going to be an opportunity for us to do some mutual learning. What does it look like from the Christian perspective, from the Jewish perspective, from the Muslim perspective, that helps us build understanding and collaboration? So as we move forward, I'm going to introduce you to our guests here in a moment. Let me give you a slide which gives a bit more context for how to communicate about this through social media. We're committed to having this conversation expand past those that actually viewed, because we think that how we talk about conflict actually can help other people get some tools for constructive discourse and dialogue. So here are the social media handles for our guests. Here's the hashtag for you to communicate your learnings via Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and we can follow along as we go. Okay, with all of that being said, let's move into hearing from our guests. The first who you'll meet is a dear friend of mine and ours with Global Immersion, Hussam Gibran. He's been someone who's been critical to our learning. We guide delegations to the Middle East to learn from people like you're going to hear from today, and Hussam is one of them. And he lives in the West Bank. So Hussam, welcome. Tell us about yourself.
Hey, John. Hey, everybody. Good evening, everybody. It's evening time here. My name is Hussam Jubran. I come from a small town called Beit Sahur. Maybe most of the Christians who are listening to us, they are not familiar with the town, but it's the place where there's public proclamation about the birth of Jesus took place. It's the town of the shepherds who were watching and waiting for the birth of Christ at that night. My town is mostly Christian. I come from a Muslim background. We are like 10 minutes away from Jerusalem, and mostly I'm involved back home in doing interfaith and political tourism to groups coming from all around the world. So basically, that's I am in fast.
Excellent. Thanks, Hussam. And I'll introduce you
You're welcome.
to another friend of ours, David Jaffe, who is a rabbi. He lives here in Boston, yet has lots of roots in Jerusalem. So welcome.
Thanks a lot, John, and great to be here with you and Hussam and everyone who's signing on to the call. Thanks for being on. So as John said, I'm located here in the Boston area, but I've lived many years of my life in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is really a second home. My ordination, rabbinic ordination, is from Israel, from an area south of Jerusalem. And both my boys were born in Jerusalem when we were living there for 5 years during the period was called the Second Intifada, 1999 to 2004. And I'm back there every summer teaching at the Pardes Institute, where I'm a senior research fellow. And so I teach here in the United States. I'm an author. I wrote a book called Changing the World from the Inside Out, which is trying to take the best teachings of religion and how we can really make a difference and change our world based on them, that religion's not only a source of hatred and fighting, but can be a source of building up the world as well. And looking forward to talking to you this hour.
Awesome. Thanks, my friend. Okay, here's how this is going to go. We are hoping to have some space at the end of this hour for Q&A, and certainly you're going to have plenty of questions come up as you listen to the threads of these three traditions, Christians, Jewish, and Muslim traditions, come together through the lens of us three. So if you have those questions, we encourage you to put them in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will interact with them. Whatever ones we're able to, be prepared for it not to be responded to, but we try to get back to them even afterwards if we can. So jump in with Q&A as we go. We're going to move, how this is going to function is David and Hussam and I are going to bounce off each other to give perspectives from these three monotheistic faiths about specifically what's going on in Jerusalem right now. So we're going to open it up with David to give us a Jewish, a perspective of Jerusalem according to the Jewish tradition, in light of where it fits in your story and why it's significant in this moment.
Thanks a lot, John. It is hard to overstate the role of Jerusalem in Judaism and to the Jewish people. And I thought a way I could communicate this was walking you through a day in a life of a religious Jew, and of which I am, and how Jerusalem shows up, and you'll see it's all over. So we start with prayers in the morning. We pray 3 times a day, and our regular set prayer that we say 3 times a day includes the following prayer: "To Jerusalem, your city, may you return in compassion, and may you dwell in it as you promised. May you rebuild it rapidly in our days as an everlasting structure, and install within it soon the throne of David. Blessed are you, Lord, who builds Jerusalem." So we'll say that 3 times a day, and as we say it, and all our prayers, when I show up in the synagogue, we're orienting ourselves towards Jerusalem. Every synagogue in the world it points where it's the prayers in the direction they go are all pointed to Jerusalem, and then in Jerusalem to the Holy Temple, which John mentioned before, the Temple Mount. And so our whole orientation, where Jerusalem falls in our life, it's our heart. It's our orientation. It's where we direct ourselves, our dreams, our prayers, every day. And so that's the beginning of our day. And then when we have something to eat, the grace we say after meals, after we eat, includes the following prayer. Again, we say this multiple times a day. "Have mercy, God, on Israel, your people, and on Jerusalem, your city, and on Zion, the abode of your glory." And it goes on and finishes by saying, "Blessed are you, God, who rebuilds Jerusalem." And this yearning for a rebuilding of Jerusalem is something that, again, we encounter multiple times during our day. Tonight, we're during the celebration. This is our holiday of Hanukkah is happening right now. So when night falls tonight, we're going to light the 8-candled candelabra, which is it's not exactly what was in the Holy Temple, but it's related to the same kind of candelabra that stood in the Holy Temple, and during the time of the Greek domination of the land of Israel, our temple was taken over and idols were put in there. And the Hanukkah story is commemorating a military victory where we regained capture of that temple in Jerusalem. So again, what the symbol that we're looking at when we light our menorah is a symbol that took place in Jerusalem. Again, just to give you a sense of the centrality of this city and this place in everything we do. Our holidays, we have 3 pilgrimage festivals that we celebrate during the year: Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, which many people may have heard of. All of those are celebrating a pilgrimage that would happen to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem every year. And so we commemorate that. We commemorate that now. At our weddings, at the end of the wedding service, we smash a glass. In my tradition, we smash a glass, and we say we're smashing that because of the destroyed temple in Jerusalem. And we want to remember that. And we say a line from Psalm 137, that I will not forget you. If I forget you, Jerusalem, my right hand will lose its cunning. And so at our moment of greatest joy, we're remembering Jerusalem. And the destruction of our temples, we had 2 in 586 and then again in 70 of the Common Era by the Romans. Those were huge events for us as a Jewish people that shifted our religion in a way and changed how we are, but we never gave up that yearning to come back. And so the term Zionism, which is a 19th century political term, it really is a much, much older thing. And the yearning for Zion, Zion, is the word for the mountain that is right next to where the temple is. And so that is what Zionism is about, is a return to Jerusalem, to that place. And so all of these things give you a sense of this love affair that the Jewish people have had since King David brought the ark, and as it's told in the book of Samuel, to this city, Jerusalem. It was a Canaanite city before that, but brought it to this, or a Jebusite city before that, came up and made his capital there and built this temple, and Solomon built his temple. That's been a 3,000-year love affair that the Jewish people have had with this city. And, we feel it's miraculous to us that we are now at a point where we actually can be back in Jerusalem and actually go to our temple. And we can't go to our temple, but it's not there, it's not built. But to go to our holiest site, below our holiest site at least, the Western Wall. Because people need to know the Western Wall is that's not the temple. That was an outside retaining wall that Herod built 2,000 years ago. But that's the closest that we really can get to our Holy of Holies. And it's just a miraculous thing for us that we can actually go there and be there and have sovereignty in that area. Is, as a Jew and as someone, as a religious Jew, it brings me to tears that I'm able to do that. And I try to live as much of my time as I can in the Holy City because of that. And so that gives you some pictures, a lot more to say, but the centrality of Jerusalem is really hard to overstate.
That's so helpful. And I know 5 minutes for someone who's given his life to your faith to talk about Jerusalem is not near enough. But that is a really helpful framework, especially through the lens of a day in the life of the Jewish community. And I think it's something that's so inspiring and fascinating to me about the Jewish tradition is how spatial it is. Like the soil, the land, actually it feeds into prayer and to worldview and to practice in so many tangible ways that many of us from the Christian tradition just simply don't understand, because we don't have the proximity of a specific land is central to our tradition. So I think that's a really critical piece. Okay, let's move to Hussam, and let's hear about Jerusalem through the lens of the Muslim tradition. Why does Jerusalem matter?
I think I will start with your last sentence. I don't think there is like something centralized in Islam in connection to land. Even when we speak about Mecca, it's not that central piece or cornerstones or stone of the Islamic faith. But Jerusalem is important, though it's not mentioned in the Quran. There is no mentioning for the word, for the city at all. But is seen by almost all Muslims as the place where an important, significant story took place during the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad. That's the story that's known as the Isra and Mi'raj. Isra and Mi'raj, to translate it to English, it means a kind of a midnight journey when Prophet Muhammad during his lifetime came from Mecca to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem he was ascended to heaven, and it happened during his lifetime. Let me make that clear. And what makes that significant is not like that's something miraculous, but it's because it's there where the Prophet received the order from God that Muslims should pray 5 times a day. So like the institutionalization of a prayer took place in Jerusalem, and that's why Jerusalem was immediately recognized as a first Qibla. Qibla is the area that you face when you go to pray. And the first Qibla in Islam was Jerusalem. Muslim for quite a long period of time, they were praying toward Jerusalem. And later in the life of Prophet Muhammad, he was given an order by God to change and make the direction to Mecca. And since then, Mecca became the Qibla. But that's what makes Jerusalem usually in the Islamic faith is so important, is its special connection to the Prophet Muhammad, the institutionalization of the prayer, and being the first Qibla. Besides that, it's also a lot of Muslim leaders. Most important one is Umar bin al-Khattab and Khalif, and during his time, Islam expanded a lot and managed to reach the Holy Land, and that's when Jerusalem became under Muslim control, when Umar bin al-Khattab came and took the keys from the Patriarch of Jerusalem about 638 AD, of course. So for mostly that about the connection of Jerusalem when we speak from Islamic perspective.
Excellent. And for if we were to think again, everyday life of someone from within the Muslim community that lives in that space, why is Jerusalem significant for the actual, like, so there's global,
it's not just
you help us understand
okay, so
that.
let me just dig deeper when we talk about the prayer in Islam. You can pray, of course, wherever you want, and you know, when you do something good in Islam, you get good deeds that will count for you at the end of the days, and will determine if you're going to go to hell or going to go to heaven. One of the things that you get deed for, of course, fasting, doing good things, and also praying. If you pray in Jerusalem, your deeds will be multiplied. It's not like when you pray, let's say, in California, in San Diego. Because if a Muslim praying is in San Diego, it's a prayer. But if you pray in Jerusalem, it counts or equals like 500 prayers compared to any other location, and that's only in Jerusalem and Mecca. Any prayer in Mecca is considered like 1,000. Any prayer in Jerusalem is considered 500 prayers. So all Muslims would love to come and be in Jerusalem to pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque, because it's first it shows that they are really pious and they want to fulfill in a way their religious duties, but also it gives them more good things for their end of the days.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I think that speaks to why Jerusalem is such a significant pilgrimage site too for all three monotheistic faiths. Like it's a huge incentive to make pilgrimage to Jerusalem if your prayer is going to be impacted in that way. And obviously, for the Jewish community to have that space nearest the Holy of Holies is possible at the Western Wall, and for Christians, it centers us in our historical story. So that's great. Thanks, Hussam. I'm going to share a little bit from a Christian perspective on Jerusalem, and then we'll move into tangibly some of the implications of this declaration of Jerusalem as Israel's capital a couple weeks ago. It's really impossible, and I know that David and Hussam felt the same tension, for me to give an objective perspective on what Jerusalem is from a Christian perspective, because Christianity looks like so many different things. There's big buckets of East and West, and then in the West, there's so many denominations, and mainline Protestant, evangelical, Catholic, Orthodox. So let me offer what I can. And here's what I would say, specific to probably most of you that are listening in today. We see Jerusalem as incredibly significant to our faith and our story, but it's not necessarily sacred or holy. It doesn't necessarily Jerusalem isn't a requirement for Christians to make pilgrimage to throughout our life for some spiritual transaction or some purpose, but it centers us in what story we're part of and what story we're living into. So it's significant, but in light of Jesus, and most interpretations of Jesus throughout the different iterations of Christianity would understand that Jesus came to bring about a kingdom that transcends borders and boundaries and even spatial plots on our map, to make it all of the earth are redeemed and reconciled in Jesus. Now, within the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament, Jerusalem is established as Israel's capital by King David. Hey, Hussam, would you mind hitting mute on yours? I think that'll help our sound quality. Is established as Israel's capital 1,000 years before Christ. And then there's this movement into exile, and Jerusalem really remains Israel's de facto capital throughout this time. And then the New Testament, Jerusalem is assumed as Israel's capital. And then there's this war that David mentioned in 70 AD when the Romans sack Jerusalem. And really that's where the Christian and Jewish identities really begin to deviate from that first century movement of followers of Jesus to a more Orthodox Jewish expression. And so for us, when we think of Jerusalem, again, we can recite the stories of old that happened in our Old Testament text. We can understand why it was significant to Jesus and his message of a new kingdom that transcended some of the constructs that he inherited around temple and throne and military and land. But I would say that we largely see Jerusalem through, now I'm going to toss out the big old nasty word, through an eschatological lens, like how Jerusalem impacts the end of our story. The eschaton is literally means the final thing. So how is our story going to end? And Christians seem to concern themselves with that a lot, whether it's eternal life in heaven, or how does Jesus' second coming actually come about? And that's where we have all sorts of different interpretations about how that story goes. But one central piece that I think is probably cross-denomination in the Christian tradition is in John's Revelation, we call it the book of Revelation, he describes this new Jerusalem that unites all people under the final authority of God. And it's both literal and metaphorical. It's the center of the world. It's a picture of this final restored reality. And so Christians are often looking towards that end. In the end, it's going to be this new Jerusalem of sorts, where all the rivers of the world run through it. Now, the big question is that Christians have to wrestle with is, what's the journey that we believe is necessary for that end to come? And that's when it all depends for Christians on interpretations. And, for many within the evangelical church, their reading of the scripture is through a dispensational lens, which is basically saying we believe that a certain set of things need to happen for Christ to return and make things whole. And that this holy land is actually the place of the literal Armageddon, where violence is going to ensue, and through that violence, peace will finally be restored. Now, mainline Protestants would totally disagree with that, and many others throughout the global church. Others would say our core values of the kingdom of God and Jesus, who came to disrupt violence and power, are more important than any kind of story we think needs to happen in that space. They would say that in the tradition I personally adhere to, would say that in Jesus' death and resurrection, God has already restored and is continuing to restore. So things don't have to get more violent to get better in the end. We have to join in God's restoration of all things now. So that changes my lens of how I see Jerusalem as this space where we can actually see peace be made real, not a place that needs to descend into violence so that peace can be made real, if that makes sense. Last thing I'll say is the global church has a very different perspective on Jerusalem than the American church, largely. American church has our nationalism so marbled into our worldview that often we associate our national and our kingdom allegiance in a similar breath. They're so marbled together so that our allies are also God's allies. That if the United States supports a country, then we think God supports a country. And that's a reality that I think we need to confront. And it plays itself out specifically in Jerusalem in this decision, where the majority world, and specifically speaking of Christian Palestinian friends, think of this very differently. They would say, if we have to be a hurdle to your peace, like if our presence is a hurdle to your end game, then something's wrong with your gospel. And so that's a little bit of framing for where Jerusalem fits in our story. We're going to post a couple articles that are helpful. One's from Gary Burge. Another one is in Christianity Today, written from the perspective of a Christian Palestinian in light of this, that talks specifically about Jerusalem and the Christian tradition. Okay, again, if you have questions, jump in with them now. Toss them in the Q&A. When we circle back, we'll be able to interact with them as we go. Let's go back to Hussam here. The question that many of us are asking are, what are the implications of Trump's declaration in the region, and specifically in relation to the peace process from a Muslim and Palestinian perspective?
To be honest, it's not clear. And let me try to give you a different perspective, and it depends where people stand. If they look into it from political perspective, or if they look into it from religious perspective. And let me surprise you, John, to tell you there are some Muslims who are not angry from that. Actually, probably they are happy because they share same Christian belief that this may bring closer the final battle where Jesus will return back and there will be all that violence and bloodshed. So they are not necessarily angry about it. From political, but generally most of the Muslims are against it because they see it as a threat. And to be more specific, if I want to try to express how religious people will look to it, it's not the fear of losing Jerusalem, it's the fear of losing the most important thing in Jerusalem from Islamic perspective, which is Al-Aqsa Mosque. Because they are more worried now that if Jerusalem is becoming recognized by United States, maybe the world will follow, and it's going to be Jewish, what would be the future of Al-Aqsa Mosque? Then there will be more serious threat that a lot of extreme Jews or extreme Christians may try to knock down Al-Aqsa Mosque in order to build the third temple. And I think that's mainly the main worry for most of the religious people. From political perspective, I think it's a slap, as I said yesterday when we were talking, me and you, I said it's a slap in the face for all people who were talking about the two-state solution. When Trump came and recognized Israel, even without defining border, what Jerusalem he's referring to when he said, I recognize Jerusalem as the eternal capital for the Jewish people. When he said that, he's telling Palestinians, you've been waiting for 25 years, hoping that there will be peace, but it's not going to happen. And there is no Palestinian. It doesn't matter how moderate he is, would accept a Palestinian state without East Jerusalem as the capital of that Palestinian state. So many political activists, political leaders, they seeing a Trump announcement as an end to the idea of the two-state solution, which also, let me add to it, doesn't mean that many people are angry about it. Many people say, oh, probably this is a good thing. Now the two-state solution is over. Let's change the dynamic of the conflict. Let's go and try to solve the conflict from different perspective. How about one state now? And actually, for many people who's believing in the one-state solution, probably they see Trump announcement as a step closer to the idea of one-state solution nowadays. And that's it. Like I leave it for now, and hopefully with the questions I will add something else.
What has been the reality on the ground in the wake of this? I mean, we've heard about from
in the ground there are daily clashes. Like since the day of the announcement, every day there are clashes not just in Bethlehem, all over West Bank. at the friction points, the points where there is Israeli army. Usually kids, youth will go and protest. They throw stones, sometimes cocktail bombs, and it's happening daily. Today it was very huge all over West Bank. At least so far, 4 people were shot and killed by the Israeli army, and we don't know where it's gonna be now, because it's not clear. But put the violence, as long you ask the question, put the violence, when we speak, put it aside. What about the future of Jerusalemite? Like, we're talking about Jerusalem, we're talking about religious perspective, how Jews, Muslims, Christians look to it. But what about the daily life of Jerusalemite, the Palestinians who are living in Jerusalem and they don't have a citizen status? They are permanent resident. What the future for them? Is Israel going to give them a full citizenship? Is Israel is going to kick them out of Jerusalem? Those are also serious questions that we are really unaware what's going to happen. And that's why a lot of Jerusalemites are becoming more nervous, more worried now. What that means, how that is going to impact our life, where we going to end up when this all is will be over.
And I think that's a critical piece, Hussam, and a reminder, our mutual friend Liel, that was one of his main critiques of our response is now the embassy is getting all this attention in the capital, but what about the people that actually live there? We can talk about
exactly.
But the people that live there are having to experience such pain every day. And when we get distracted from their pain, we can have an inhumane policy.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm not. That's true. That's true. And I think, like in most of Jerusalemite, they are in a situation like a limbo. They don't know where they are now. Yeah. What's going to be their situation? How Israel is going to use that announcement? Is it going to be something good for them? Is it going to be something bad for them? What if Israel decide to revoke the permanent residency for like 100,000 Palestinians who are in Jerusalem? Mm-hmm. Who's going to deal with that? How people will look to it?
Let me ask one more question, if you could just answer briefly. Is there any distinction between the way the Christian Palestinian community is responding and the Muslim Palestinian community is responding?
No, like from national perspective, it's the same. As I said, I'm from Beit Sahur. I live in a Christian town. It's mostly like 72%, as I mentioned, are Christians here in my town, and we all share the same views. We mostly look at it from national perspective. What's the implication of that on the Palestinian people and the peace process? That's how usually approach it. And mostly Christians, local Christians, Palestinian Christians are more analyzing it from the point of view of what would be the future of the peace process, and taking it from national perspective.
Excellent. Thanks, Hussam.
You're welcome.
Okay, David, let's jump in. What's been the Jewish perspective on what's happening right now with this declaration?
Yeah, I mean, the Jewish perspective is such a funny thing. We have so many perspectives. And so I'm going to try to give a picture of some of them. And I just also really want to be clear that I'm sitting in Boston and I'm an American Jew. And I'm not in Israel. I'm not an Israeli Jew. I've spent a lot of time over there, very connected to Jerusalem, but just to understand that. So I want to say, on the one hand, and anything to do with Israel-Palestine, this area is going to be complex. So on the one hand, everything I just said in my first round about our relationship and Jerusalem being our heart of Judaism and the Jewish people, regarding that, there's a real joy, I would say, broadly, even for people who generally disagree with the president on almost everything. There is a sense of joy around it. Like, this is finally acknowledgement. This is our capital for 3,000 years of our people, and now the major power of the world is recognizing that. So there is a sense of that. And I'll just give you an example. In my own life, my children who were born in Jerusalem as American citizens in Jerusalem, their passport says Jerusalem but does not have a country on it. Why doesn't it have a country on it? It doesn't have a country on it because it's U.S. policy not to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, as part of Israel, until a negotiated peace process, until right now. And so my kids don't have a country. Now, you might say, what's the big deal? It's not such a big deal. The case went to the Supreme Court. Someone else brought a case to the Supreme Court on this, and the Supreme Court decided it's really the president's powers to decide these things. So that may shift now, and it's in our life. Every time we look at the passport, there's no country. It's like they weren't born in a country, and so that shifts. So there's a real sense of this is an acknowledgement of something that needed to be acknowledged for a long time. Okay, that's that. Now, there's a lot of disagreement within our community around this declaration. I'll start from in Israel, among Israelis, and Hussam maybe could confirm this or not, but among Israeli Jews, almost across the board, not to the more part of the left, but almost across the board, there's like saying this is good. This is a good thing. And that's for Israeli Jews. I would say for American Jews, it's more divided. I would say you kind of have a right-left division. So on the right, there's, on the one hand, a sense of like, yeah, this is great. This is, a sense of this is what's real, and this moves us towards expanding our sovereignty over more and more and more of this land. There are some on the right, and Hussam's probably heard this also, in the settler movement who've been nervous about this and thinking this is going to push Israel into having to do some kind of peace deal that they're not going to want to do, and they'd rather just keep building in Jerusalem. So I've read some things like that are going on. More on the left, particularly in the American Jewish community, and more on the farther left in Israel, there's more of a sense of like this in the context of the bigger picture, this doesn't seem like a wise thing to do. Like, where's this coming from? This does not have anything to do with, what's happening politically in Israel right now. And this has to do with the president being beholden to right-wing evangelical Christians, that this is because of the reasons you stated before, John, dispensationalism, and that is such an important issue. So he's going to do it and move the embassy, but it doesn't have anything to do with going on the ground there. And it makes moving towards a two-state solution much harder. And Hussam is saying, and I hear it, many Palestinians are giving up on the two-state solution and want one state. In the Jewish community, on our right wing, we have people also want to give up on the two-state solution, not necessarily go to one state, but go to some kind of autonomy, and that's getting more than what this talk is about right now. But for people who really hold on to, Jews who hold on to a two-state solution and say that to have a Jewish democratic state means that there has to be a Palestinian democratic state living alongside, this makes things harder. This makes things harder because it for lots of reasons. It boxes the moderates out and makes the moderates look more stupid. It makes Abbas have to maybe act more extreme so he can regain credibility on the street. There's a whole bunch of reasons why this makes things harder to move towards a two-state solution. Not out of the question. I mean, it's still certainly a possibility. But that's where I would say that's kind of your center left in the Jewish community perspective on this. Not a helpful thing. We feel happy in some ways about it because of our relationship to Jerusalem, but in having context, it really doesn't make sense to do this right now.
Is there any concern? I mean, it's now really clear that from an international perspective, it's being condemned. Everything from the EU to the Arab world, who is in close proximity with Israel. Is there concern? There's a celebration from many within the Jewish community. There's concern. Is there any anxiety about potential violence that may be coming down upon that community as a result of this decision?
Well, I think this gets to a little bit what you were saying before, that these are real people. These are real people who have real lives. And I think something very dangerous regarding Jerusalem and Israel is doing things for kind of abstract reasons, abstract theological, religious reasons, which Jerusalem's always going to draw that because of what it is. And I very much believe in the ultimate rebuilding of the temple, all that kind of stuff. But these are people's real lives. And the fact there was no real reason to do this, and people may die and have died already because of this, I think is a cause of a lot of concern. And thank God the violence hasn't been worse than it is, but it could. Jerusalem's such a tinderbox, as some will attest to, that anything done, I think, that's unilateral or that kind of upsets things, very dangerous. And this is one of the places I really think that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been quite responsible and around not permitting ministers to go up to the Temple Mount, which should be our right to do as Jews. We should be able to go up there, but understanding how sensitive it is. And as Hussam was saying, the real fear of losing Al-Aqsa is something very, very deeply felt. And I think gets way kind of the rumor mill goes, and social media doesn't help, and lots of rumors start spreading in the Palestinian community about, thousands of settlers marching to take over Temple Mount, which is never true. But I think the Prime Minister's been very thoughtful about that and of trying to prevent that. So a statement, a declaration like this throws all that up and kind of ignites the tinderbox. So yes, there's a lot of concern about violence.
Yeah. Good. Okay. I'm going to offer a Christian perspective on this declaration, and again, one Christian perspective, although trying to hit on a few different iterations of it. Any other questions? Continue to jump in. We'll move into Q&A after this, and then also have some direct responses for how we think from our faith traditions we should respond to this. I'm thinking of a few things. One, a specific segment within the Christian tradition sees that, as I stated earlier, violence is actually the necessary means to an eternal peace, and that this declaration is just a necessary next step in that journey to achieve a long-term peace. So what that means is there's large numbers of, and David, you mentioned this, evangelical Christians who are celebrating this decision as a fulfillment of that next step that leads to the final step. And it was largely the right-leaning evangelicals who supported Trump in making this decision real. And so it's through that interpretation of Scripture, which we are all allowed to have our own interpretations of Scripture, but this interpretation says that this is a fulfillment of prophecy, and this is something that America, specifically previous presidents, should have done before it came to Donald Trump's desk, and he finally completed this once and for all. And so that's one segment. And so they wouldn't see this as an inhibitor of the peace process. They would see it necessary within their understanding of what peace means, if that makes sense. Another segment sees this as very pragmatically the end of U.S.'s role in the peace process, that this is a moment where we've lost trust with Palestinian leadership, because we've taken a side on such a contentious issue that has direct implications for the final status negotiations of Jerusalem, which is a centerpiece of any kind of final status solution, whether it's two-state or one-state. And because we've lost trust, then we've handed over the keys to the negotiations to another superpower in our world. And we'll see if that's real, if that's true. We hear stories of that already bubbling up. And so that segment of Christians would say, we had an opportunity using our American citizenship to leverage peace, and we no longer can. Another group of Christians would say that we have compromised our values and our commitment to human flourishing. And this goes to what you were saying, David, that the primary ethic is to love God and love neighbor, and for us within the Christian tradition, to love enemy. And so anything that inhibits the flourishing of life needs to be our top priority, because that's actually a reflection of our love of God. And so if we are going to drop a match in a tinderbox and watch this region, metaphorically or literally blow up because of our decisions, our theology, our politics, then we have done harm to our faith. We are not following the Jesus we talk about. There's a large number of Christians, and I'd say it's a growing number of Christians who are communicating about it that way. That if humans, and namely our Christian sisters and brothers living in the Holy Land, which often get overlooked by many evangelicals, we have lots of Christians that have lived there since the time of Jesus. When they're left in an impossible situation and forced to live life and raise their kids in a context that's going inevitably to experience violence and war, then something is wrong with our theology and our politic. And so that's many see this declaration as a compromise of our values and our commitment to human flourishing, as is our call and command as followers of Jesus. Now there's another group I think that's just confused and kind of throwing our hands up, and this goes back to what Hussam was saying, wondering if this actually breaks up the status quo. Well, nothing was happening anyway. Maybe this moves the process forward. Now, the asterisk on that, the only way this process moves forward because of this decision is through violence. And we're already hearing it. The unrest is already existing. Hamas is calling for a third intifada, a third uprising, which is a violent uprising, not necessarily a nonviolent one. And so if if in our apathy we throw up our hands and say, well, this might break up the status quo, well, then we also have to agree that violence is a tool for peace. And specifically from my perspective and for our work with Global Immersion, we would say that violence is not actually the invitation of Jesus. We follow a nonviolent Jesus who would give his life before taking someone else's. So that's a problematic space. So that's a few perspectives, a few Christian perspectives on this declaration and its implications on the peace process. Okay, I am seeing questions come in, and a couple came in while I was talking that I haven't been able to read yet. So let me jump into a couple that I had already noted. One of them is to you, David, and this came actually in the comments area. The question is, what are the expectations if and for the rebuilding of the temple and the coming of the Jewish Messiah? There are Christian expectations, but I imagine they differ from a Jewish theology. Can you explain?
Sure, I'll try to do it as concisely as possible. Traditional Jewish belief is that there will be a third temple, and that'll be it's part of the Messianic era. The Messiah will come. The Messiah will be someone who is so inspiring towards goodness and towards raising us up that people will follow, and we'll live in a world without war. And we have different perspectives on it, but one dominant one is that the third temple will be built in peace. And there's one perspective is built in peace, or one is it comes down from heaven to there onto the holy mountain. And so either way, it's not coming about through an end of days war. It's coming about through some type of messianic era that we've gotten to by creating the conditions of the Messiah. And so that's a one perspective. There is another perspective that we can force this and push it, and it's very, very fringe in our in Jewish theology. The mainstream Jewish theology, traditional Jewish theology, is that we wait for God, and God's going to deliver the Messiah, and God's going to deliver the temple. We do not take that into our own hands. There are some fringe groups that have started working on doing some of this and building, the vessels of the temple, and at least once a year, they try to plant the cornerstone of the third temple, which leads to violence, and it's a terrible thing. And so far, the Israeli government has been very responsible about holding that back. So again, my answer to you is, in really the broad mainstream Jewish perspective is the third temple is not something that we go about building with bricks and mortar and go about building. We build it through our deeds and through creating a world of love and peace.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, Hussam, there's been a few. I'm going to try to summarize them because they hit on some similar threads. Here's how I summarize. Can you speak to the stateless nature of Palestinians as a whole? And
I read those comments. I saw them.
The daily difficulty of moving in and out. The other one I wanted to tie it to is you talked about the one state option. Would that just maintain a status quo where you're continuing to live in the state, in the limbo that you're in right now?
No,
Go ahead.
No, for Palestinians aspiring for the one-state solution, it's a state where everybody will have equal rights, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, or whatever, atheists, or whatever they believe in. That would be the case. And I think their case is strengthened now because no one would be really have a good way to promote the idea of two-state solution, as long Jerusalem, at least from a Trump perspective, America perspective, is out of the equation. And let me try to connect it to reality. And like in a sense that probably in basic daily life for Palestinians, Trump didn't change anything. Jerusalem has been under Israeli control since 1967. Palestinians like me can't go to Jerusalem unless they have a specific permit that allows them to go there, and a few people get that. Jerusalem, with both its sides, east and west, under full Israeli control. So there is full Israeli sovereignty over the two areas. My sister-in-law was arrested just a while ago for conducting polls, just visiting houses and gathering information from Palestinian families. They accused her of representing working for Palestinian Authority, and she spent time in jail. They couldn't prove that accusation, and then she was released just for working like with UNDP for that project. she spent a week in a prison, which shows how tight is the control of Israel over Jerusalem. We live under a lot of restrictions all over. We can't move. It's not easy for us to travel. But let me focus on Jerusalem. I think the main fear of Palestinians and why they are worried, confused in a way, is not about Trump. We're more worried about what's happening between Trump and Saudi Arabia. There is a huge fear amongst Palestinians that there is something cooking, which is probably you read about it in the news, the ultimate deal that's been talking about a lot, at least in the Middle East. I'm not sure in the United States that there is some kind of agreement between Trump and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to impose some kind of a deal on Palestinian people that will get us basically nothing. It will go with what David was talking about, the whole idea that some right-wing activists in Israel trying to promote is some kind of autonomy in Area A and Area B, which is the division, which is 40% of West Bank, which is like 40% of 22% of what we used to call it historical Palestine. So that's, I think, the main fear, the role of Saudis and what may come next after this idea. Because in reality, the Trump declaration announcement is not changing anything for people living daily here in this land, at least from the Palestinian side. The main fear is, as I said, what's happening next? What will come next to us? And are we capable to stop it, to be against it, or our leadership will cave in, and that will be, in a way, the end of the Palestinian situation.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you. There's been a couple questions about how to, especially for Christians specifically, how to respond to people whose interpretation of the Holy Land or Jerusalem is through this lens of Armageddon in order for the Christ to return. A brief answer that I may offer: one, we say this over and over in our trainings, try to listen longer than feels comfortable. Try to hear them out and humanize that perspective and understand that it comes from somewhere. Second, ask the question, if that is the case, if violence needs to continue to happen for Christ to return, what did that mean? Like, what did the cross and resurrection mean to you? Do we believe that God waged a decisive peace in Jesus in death and it made it real in resurrection, or not? Because I think that theology actually diminishes who Jesus was and is inviting us to be. A third suggestion I have is to tell stories. You have to tell stories of people that are impacted by our incongruent theology, which then impacts bad policy. And if we tell stories of people that are impacted, almost everyone wants to be compassionate, wants to be empathetic. And when we hit on that and we put faces to names and move it from 30,000-foot ideology and into real life around the table relationship, things change. So any way you can tell stories, that's significant. We're gonna move into the question to both Hussam and David and myself about how we respond. But I want to ask this of both of you, if you can answer briefly, because one of the main ways that Westerners specifically interface with the Holy Land, whether they're coming as Jews, Christians, or Muslims, is through pilgrimage. One of the questions from Stephanie is, what's one of your suggestions for us to keep in mind on how to come there well? Like, how do we make pilgrimage to the Holy Land in an ethical way, I think is the question she's asking. One brief suggestion you might have for us.
To come open-minded and be ready to listen to everybody's narrative and everyone's perspective without putting your value judgment. That, this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing. Because people live under a lot of things here, a lot of difficulties, both sides, speaking about Palestinians. And as a pilgrim who he or she is coming here, my advice always be open your heart, open your mind, listen to everybody, and try to avoid judging things according to your values and the way you grow up in the United States or in Europe, and try to immerse yourself in under
I think we got it, Hussam, although yours broke up. So
to give Okay.
All right. That was good.
Okay.
I paused there because your internet was spotty. So, David, how would you respond to that?
I'd say I have a similar answer. There's a beautiful poem by Yehuda Amichai, an Israeli poet, about the tourist, and he has the tour guide is pointing out, all the beautiful
Yeah,
sights.
the arc.
There's a man who is getting food for his family, and there he is sitting there. And the point of the poem is that real live people live here. And so I would come. There's so much theological weight that you bring with you when you come to the Holy Land, that try to put that aside in some way or see through it to see real people that are living lives here and know how much you don't know and accept how much you don't know about what's going on, and then listen as much as you can. That would be a way to come well on pilgrimage.
Know how much we don't know. Come on, let's preach. Us American Christians aren't so good at that.
Nope.
Awesome. Okay, Hussam, how must Muslims respond? What's your brief bullet points?
Oh, wow. I don't think I will have an answer, man, for that. How must Muslim respond to that? Really, because like you're speaking about 1 billion Muslims all around the world.
I'm losing you again.
I think in all the Muslim countries. You hear me?
Still spotty.
You hear me? Oh, damn, not last minute.
There we go.
Now, how's now? Thing. I'm not sure we're receiving any support from Muslim leaders. There was a Muslim summit just a while ago in Turkey, and they came up almost empty-handed. They came up with nothing. So usually my advice for Palestinian people, for Muslims, try to protest, but avoid using violence. It doesn't matter where you are. Do your best to avoid violence, because that will not be good for our cause.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes?
Yes, we got it. It came through. David, real quick, before you give your response, would you just answer the question?
Yeah, I saw it. The poem is called Tourists, and it's very short. It goes like this: salvation will come when the guide tells those tourists, you see that Roman arch over there? It doesn't matter. But next to it, to the left, down below, sits a man who bought fruits and vegetables for his family.
John, I want to jump in because I usually quote Amichai because I talk about my grandpa's story, who was a blind man and used to work in Jerusalem, to explain my work, my role is not about touristic places, it's about people.
Nice.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'm Jewish response. One thing I wanted to say, just in that, how important the verse is. I know to many evangelicals about from Genesis 12 of I will bless those who bless you and curse them and curses you, and for the Jewish people, I think to be blessed means to live well in our land, and that means being able to live well with our neighbors, and so whatever can be done to help that happen, I think, is important. A Jewish response to this, I think, is to to not overdo it. This was something that gave most Jews who really love Jerusalem, have this relationship with Jerusalem, something we've wanted in a certain way. Many of us wanted it in more of a context of peacemaking than it came, but wanted it, and not to overplay it, I think, is very important.
Excellent. Thank you. Christians, how should we respond? I think it's critical for us, especially those of us in the United States. We have to have faith-informed citizenship rather than citizenship-informed faith. In other words, we have to continually think through the lens of our citizenship to the kingdom of God as our first priority, rather than our citizenship to our nation state. It's a both and, but the kingdom piece has to be prioritized, or else we can begin to get out of our values get undermined by a political agenda. I think we have to continue to move forward with curiosity rather than critique, because right now there's so many sides and people are yelling and arguing. We have to be the ones who lead and model curiosity for all involved, not because we're not turning a blind eye to injustice, but we are creating space for mutual learning and relationship. And to that point, we have to build relationships and learn the human story and understand that the Spirit actually guides us on the path towards peace in the context of relationship. I would say two more things. We have to leverage our leadership and our privilege by reminding our elected officials that a policy of de-escalation is an option. I know that sounds like a lot of words, but oftentimes our political paradigm says we first and foremost respond to violence with violence, or even we initiate with violence. And there is a thing called a policy of de-escalation that means we can be the ones who model de-escalating violence rather than, as David said earlier and warned us of, a decision like this can be a tinderbox, and it can just have huge repercussions for the human flourishing of so many people. And so what are the political ends we can push our officials towards that lead with diplomacy rather than with violence and war making? The last thing I'm going to say is to be careful with our theology. When our theology dehumanizes in order to achieve a theological or a political interest, then something's wrong with our theology. And it certainly blurs our vision for who Jesus was and who Jesus is inviting us to be as peacemakers in our world today. So with all of that being said, huge thank you to both of our guests, Hussam, David. Your perspective is so necessary. I really believe this is the embodiment of what some of the stuff I just talked about. Like any one of you that are listening right now, you're choosing to get curious, and you're hearing from a Jewish perspective and a Muslim perspective and a Christian perspective about a very contentious issue. So I saw you guys unmute. Is there anything you want to say before I close this up?
Oh, thanks for everybody who joined in. And David, the pleasure to talk to you. It was really fun hearing you.
Likewise, Hussam, really enjoyed it. And John, hearing you too. Just keep learning and keep open to learning. I think that's so important.
Excellent. Thanks, gentlemen. So if you are following Global Immersion and our work, please jump into our Peacemaking on Earth campaign. That's also a space where we invite people into our Embers community, which is a monthly a community of donors, financial donors who are actually part of an exclusive community that gets access to additional resources and training and even insight into how our organization functions. Let me offer this prayer as we go. May the Spirit of God give us the wisdom and discernment to navigate the complexities of this moment. May we always see the humanity, the dignity, and the image of God in everyone and seek their flourishing before pushing our personal, political, or religious agenda. And may we join together to see peace realized not only in Israel and Palestine, but in our homes and on our streets. Go in peace, friends.
Amen.